Well, welcome back to another Coffee and a Chat. Today, I'm going to tell you a story. And I may have told this story or parts of it in the past about a woman in a church that I used to go to. But I don't know. The Lord had me thinking about her the other day. And I actually know somebody that kind of, I realized they, you know when you meet somebody and it's like they remind you of somebody and you're just not sure who. Well, it dawned on me that this person reminds me of this woman I used to know. And we're just going to call her Birdie. If I have told the story before, I don't know what name I might have used because I often will change names and different little things to try to protect people's privacy, especially when it's somebody else's story. But when I started going to the church, Birdie was probably in her late 70s. And it was a little country church, and she had lived down the road from this church for a very long time. And Birdie was different. Birdie she had an extremely low IQ. She was uneducated. She lacked common sense. She really needed somebody to take care of her, but I don't know that there was ever anybody to really take care of her. I don't know. We never knew all the backstory with Birdie of, was she this way as a child? Was it something that happened later? We didn't know. And Birdie would tell us some wild stories sometimes, but, and some we were able to confirm were true and others, no. And there were old time people out in the country that had known Birdie since she was young. She had been married at one time. She was married to this man, and she always, let's say their last name was Smith. It wasn't, but let's say it was. She called him Mr. Smith, and because he was an older man, and he needed a wife and somebody to work, and I guess Birdie would do. So he took Birdie as a wife, and he worked up in the hills. He took care of animals and herded them around. Now, they did all of this because it had been way back when, and they did it all on foot. He and Birdie, they just lived in a tent, and they lived on the land. They didn't, I don't even know if they went for supplies or if supplies were taken to them, but her husband was kind of a hermit type of guy, and he didn't really like being around people. And so they had, they would be moving, all the time trying to find grass and whatnot for the animals to graze on. And so they had a cart that carried all their belongings, and it was designed to be pulled by a mule. But the mule died, and Mr. Smith did not go and get another mule. Why should he? He had Birdie. So he used to hook Birdie up to that cart, and that was part of what Birdie did, was she pulled that cart. And when she wasn't cooperating or doing things the way he wanted, he used to hit her in the head with a board. And I know there were many of us thought maybe that's what happened to Birdie, but we're pretty sure Birdie already was pretty simple-minded before Mr. Smith met her. And that probably is why he was even able to get her to marry him and live such a life. But to my knowledge, this is the only kind of life that Birdie ever knew. Now, Mr. Smith, being an older man, eventually he passed away. And somehow Birdie was moved into this little shack on somebody else's land. And it had, a main room that, one room that was like her little living area and had kind of a little makeshift kitchen area. And then there was like a glorified closet off of this, and that's where was her bedroom. And anyway, Birdie used to just sleep on the ground, and when the church took Birdie under their wing, so to speak, they got her a bed, they got her some furnishings, and got her to get up off the ground. Now, she did not have running water, and she did not have electricity. But she'd always lived that way, and that didn't ever seem to bother her. They had tried to move her in with somebody else or into a better home, or she didn't want to leave it. That was her home. And she loved that home. And she had an outhouse out back. And Bertie was freakishly strong. We had guys in our church that lifted weights and all, I mean, muscle guys. And they were like, if they got in a fight with Bertie, they were pretty sure she'd win. It was like this woman had no limit to her strength. So strong, worked hard her whole life. And so one of the funny stories that I remember is Bertie needed a purpose in life. And so the church had years earlier had given her a key to the church. They taught her how to fix coffee in a coffee pot. And so she would come up early, because Bertie would get up like at 3 a.m. and be starting her day. And so she wanted to open the church, and they agreed to it. So she'd come down, she'd open the church. If it was cold outside, she'd turn on the heat. If it was hot outside, she'd turn on the air. She'd make the coffee, and then she'd wait for people to arrive. And that was Bertie's job. That was her purpose in life. And she took it very seriously. And don't anybody else ever ask her for her key or try to do one of her jobs. Oh my goodness. Because she didn't want the help. That was hers. And you better back off. We had built a new sanctuary, and we're building a new church. And when we did, boy, she was like, when do I get my key? When do I get my key? Because she was so worried she wasn't going to have a key. And that was one of the first things we did, was get Bertie's key so she could get in there. And every Sunday morning, there was Bertie. Well, this one Sunday, you know, there were some of us that would be the first ones in there before, you know, because, you know, pastor, worship team, you know, stuff like that. You know, we'd come in and get everything ready for the morning, and Bertie would be there to greet us and have the coffee made and stuff. Well, this one morning we walked in, and there was a very unpleasant odor in the church. And the guys are like, oh my word, did the septic back up into the church or something? You know, so they start checking restrooms and, you know, trying to find out where this very unpleasant odor was coming from. And everything seemed fine. And pretty soon Bertie goes, oh, you worried about that? You smell that? And they're like, yeah, do you know what it is? She goes, yeah, that's no problem. That's me. And we're like, it's you? And she goes, yeah, this morning when I got up, you know, I went out to the outhouse to use it, and boy, it was full. Yeah, so I just pushed that outhouse over, because that's what she used to do. And then I dug out that cesspool down there, and, you know, and threw it over to the side, and then pushed the outhouse back over it. And, you know, she goes, I had to get down in there, you know. And then we're looking at Bertie, and we're like, oh, wait a minute. So Bertie was covered, because Bertie would never bathe except for this one woman in the church. Oh, she was, God bless her, because she took Bertie to her doctor's appointments and stuff. And she also made sure that Bertie got a bath at least once a week. That was about the most you could get Bertie to agree to. And she would take her to her house and shower her. And anyway, so Bertie had shoveled out the outhouse, her cesspool, and been down in it, and it was all over her. And then she, you know, when it was time to come down to the church, she came down to the church and opened up and made coffee. Now, one of the guys was at the coffee pot as she's telling us what happened, because, you know, he was worse than me at needing his coffee. Oh, my word. All of a sudden, people just go, oh, don't drink the coffee. It was so funny. Oh, my word. And so then we called up this gal, and we're like, told her what happened. She's like, oh, my word. She came down, got Bertie, took her home, got her bathed, got clean clothes on her, and Bertie just didn't understand what all the fuss was about, and they were going to be late. And the gal's like, no, they'll hold church for you. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. They'll wait. And so, yeah, oh my word. So Bertie she was a lot of work at times, but she was a joy, and we loved her so much. Well, when she was probably in her early 80s, Bertie ended up passing away. And Now, we had been told that Bertie had children, but we had never seen or heard from any kids. In all the years, nobody ever came to see her or check in on her. And she didn't have a phone or anything, but she didn't get letters because she couldn't read. And there was somebody from the church that would go pick up her mail and read her mail to her. And, we took care of we took care of everything that we could for Bertie and still let her have her own life. And so the gal that used to take her to the doctor and stuff and bathe her and everything, she checked in with some things with the state, and sure enough, Bertie did have children. She had a lot of children. Mr. Smith must have just kept her pregnant, and as much as he could. And then the story is that those children, as soon as they could get out, they left, and they never came back. And the state had been in touch with them many times, to see if they would take an interest in their mother, help out with some things. Nobody wanted to be bothered. And so this gal, she goes, I'm going to call each one, because she got numbers for all of them. She goes, I'm going to call them all and let them know that their mother's passed, because they need to know that. And maybe they'll want to come to the service, because we were, the church took care of her burial and all of that. And we had a huge service for her, because everybody in this country bumpkin community knew Bertie. And the church was standing room only. But all of the children said no. They had no interest to come. It didn't matter. It didn't change anything in their lives. And, don't call me again. Don't bother me. They didn't want anything to do with her. And that really hurt our hearts. Well, the day of the funeral, an older gentleman showed up, and that none of us knew. He wasn't from the community. And he, tried to find who was in charge. And then he's like, I'm one of Bertie's sons. And so we're like, oh, we were just so happy to have him there. You're our guest of honor. And we asked him, would he be willing to sit up front as a representative of her family? And they're like, yeah, he's like, okay, I'll do that. He was all by himself. And very nice man. Anyway, so he sat there, and the service was not your typical service. We didn't really even have a eulogy, because there just was so much we didn't know about Bertie. And then what we did know, we couldn't always confirm all the stories and stuff. So what we decided to do was we were just going to open it for people to share what they knew and loved about Bertie. And it was a long service, because there were a lot of people wanting to share. And so we all had our stories. And one of the things with Bertie is she loved Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth was everything to her. If you wanted to make Bertie happy, you gave her anything that had Queen Elizabeth's name or picture, especially picture, on it. That's all that was in her house. She would cut out pictures out of magazines of Queen Elizabeth and tape it to the wall, She was wallpapering her little shack with Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. And she was just so in love with her. And so, we shared about that, and we shared about, all kinds of things about Bertie, and the funny stories and cesspool stories, and trying to get her into a home, even trying to put electricity and plumbing into where she lived, but she didn't want it. She had never had it. She didn't understand it. She didn't need it. She had an old wringer washer, and she ran her hand clear through that wringer because she couldn't get it out, and she couldn't get the little thing undone. And praise the Lord, somebody had come by to check on her and was able to undo the latch to get her hand out. I don't even know if she understood that latch was there. And she had not broken any bones in her hand. She wasn't a really big woman, but she was strong. But she had done so much tissue damage that, oh my word, her hand was purple. We thought she was going to lose her hand, but she was like, nobody was taking her hand. And so she was putting salves and stuff on it that she made. And she probably knew more about the right way to take care of that hand than the doctors did, to tell you the truth. She did fully recover and had pretty much full use of that hand when everything was said and done. But it was a long recovery. And, and there just were things like that, where we knew that, because somebody would just happen to stop by to check on her when that happened. You know, the Lord watched out for Birdie. God loved Birdie, and we knew it. So at the end, my husband at the time, he was the pastor of the church, my first husband, and he had said, you know, was there anybody else that wanted to share? Because we didn't want to cut anybody off. Well, this son, who had made, by the way, he said he would sit on the front, but please don't ask him to say anything or anything like that, and we'd agreed to it. Well, he stood up and said, I'd like to say something. So those of us that had talked to him earlier were like, whoa. And so the first thing he did was ask our forgiveness for not being involved. And he told us how, you know, all the siblings had, you know, hey, did you hear mom died? You know, that our mom died. They didn't even call her mom, or, you know, or that Birdie, whatever, however they referred to her. And everybody decided they didn't really care. It didn't matter. You know, they didn't have anything to do with her anyway. And so, you know, nobody was coming to the service or anything. And he said that just kind of ate at him, like, probably would be right for at least somebody to show up. So he decided to be the somebody and show up. But he was just, you know, trying to do something right. And then, you know, and he said, you know, our mom was very different. And we just saw her as being stupid and dumb and an embarrassment and everything else. And every single one of us, as soon as we could run away and get out of there, we did. And some of the kids left to go and be in foster care rather than stay. And it was a hard life, you know, because they would have lived up in the hills, going through all the stuff, you know, and mom pulling the cart and everything. And dad sounds like he drove a pretty hard, you know, a hard deal. And I'm sure they had to work and everything, and they were probably lacking in education as well. And so they knew the only way to have any chance at life was to get out of there. But they never felt anything towards their mom. They just saw her as being very embarrassing, and they didn't like people to know that they were part of that family. And so they had all moved far away, you know, when they grew up and you know, with this thing that they would never come back. And then he said, but today I'm listening to all of you. And he goes, my mom was loved. You guys loved her. And you knew things about her I never knew. You found good in her. She wasn't all bad. She wasn't all an embarrassment. Nobody ever stood up here and said Birdie was embarrassing. Birdie was a joy. Birdie was a delight. Birdie, you know, she was so full of love, so full of life. She was a hard worker. All that. He goes, I never knew that that's who my mom was. I never saw her that way. And yet, as you say it, he goes, I did know. But all I chose to focus on, all my siblings chose to focus on, was what embarrassed us. And now he stood there with regrets. She's gone. She is gone, and I can never know her like that. And he wept, and it was, you know, we found ourselves coming around him to comfort him. I don't know, Marvin and I were talking about it the other day, and I was telling him funny Birdie stories, and he was like, oh, my word, yeah, don't drink the coffee. But we also know different people that have decided someone in their family isn't good enough, is an embarrassment, is a loser, is stupid, whatever. And they have nothing to do with them. They're not involved in their lives at all. A lot of them dealing with parents that they don't want anything to do with. Or they're just kind of, you know, once a year, you know, hey, how you doing, or whatever. But they don't have any real relationship. And the day's going to come when that person is going to be gone. And there will be regret. So I just wanted to share this with you today. To think about, who are the people in your life? Who's your family? Maybe even a childhood friend, and you've decided it's too embarrassing, you don't want to be associated with them, or they're not worth your time, or whatever. I just want to ask you to maybe give it another thought, because that person, you see, none of those kids would have existed without Birdie. She bore every single one of them out of her body. She carried them in her body, and then she gave birth to them. And she took care of them. I mean, they survived. She may not have been everybody's dream mom, but she's the mom they got. That's the other thing. had a lot of conversations lately with people that are, I hate my childhood because, and, my parent, my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister, they've got all these complaints and stuff. You guys, none of us got the childhood. I don't believe any of us got the childhood we think we should have had or deserved, if we even think along those lines. Probably people that don't even think along those lines. I had a lot of good things about my growing up. I had great parents, but I was harmed because they didn't know everything that was going on under their own roof. And there was a lot of abuse I went through, but I don't blame my parents for that, especially the time that was happening. Nobody talked about those things. People were pretty ignorant of some of the things that go on and what happens to children. And my parents only left us with people that they could trust, because you don't always know who the bad guy is. But, I could take a stand and be mad at them, I guess, and say, well, they should have been more aware, or they should have known, or they should have seen, recognized, this behavior in me or whatever. But what good does that do? My mom and dad were wonderful parents, and they did the absolute best that they could do at that time. And that's usually true for everybody as a parent. I can look back and go, oh, I should have done this different as a parent. But you know what? At that time, for where I was at, I did the absolute best that I could do for my children. And that's a good parent, is doing our best for them, sacrificing for them, protecting them, and helping them grow up to be individual adults that can go out and make their way in the world. But are there people in my life that I'm neglecting because, I hope not. I can't think of any. But is there somebody maybe that you're neglecting or you don't have a relationship with? Are you feeling sorry for yourself because your mom wasn't who you thought she should be, or your dad wasn't who you thought he should be, because they had flaws, because they failed, because they weren't as educated as maybe other parents, or the job they did didn't have, high prestige or whatever? I think we need to rethink things and take another look, because, moving the camera, everybody deserves to be loved. Yep. So if you haven't talked to mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or your siblings or somebody in a while because you've just been too busy, you know what? Unbusy yourself for at least 5 minutes and give them a call. Just tell them you love them, you appreciate them. And if you're holding things against anybody, ask God to help you to forgive them, to let go of that, because the only one you're hurting is you. All right. That's my birdie story today. She was an awesome woman. She was a lot of work sometimes. I had my shift of going down to birdies and taking care of things. And it could be exhausting sometimes. But I loved Birdie. Everybody deserves to be loved. Everybody needs to be loved. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. You have an awesome day.